Ladies and gentlemen, it is a crime against gaming that none of you made me play Wartales before today. This game is phenomenal. I am wildly hooked on it, and while I know I have heard of it in the past, the fact that it took this long for me to finally sit down and check it out when we have a whole cadre of turn-based tactics and strategy enjoyers out there who follow this channel, I'm just flabbergasted, to be perfectly honest with you. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and we're going to talk about what is very quickly becoming one of my favorite games I've played in 2026. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including my ongoing coverage of the greater turn-based tactics and strategy sphere, including phenomenal titles like Wartales, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. So yes, Wartales is the second part of our coverage of the Turn-Based Thursday Fest for 2026, one of 3 games that I'm going to be covering as part of the event, and one of 4 that we'll be covering this week. I'm going to tell you guys right now, this one's going to be really hard to beat. As with each of these videos, if you have not already gone and checked out the Turn-Based Thursday Fest page on Steam, I do highly recommend that you do so. I'll have it linked in the description. You will find a ton of new games, classic games, and titles that you would probably love, just haven't heard of, all on different sales and different offerings for all of us who love this genre. Go ahead and check it out. Now, as for why I love Wartales so very much, I would love to count the reasons for you, but we would be here all day. So we'll go through a priority list of some of my favorite features. Of course, we will briefly talk about what the game actually is, what I enjoy so much about its art, its aesthetic, its OST, and its music, and then, of course, the mechanics and the story, such as it is. I do have a lot to discuss with this one, so let's get into it. So what is Wartales? Wartales is, kind of as the name implies, a tale of war. Your war, specifically, as a very infinitesimally small part of a much greater world that does not care about you. See, Wartales is interesting in that it's not an RPG. It doesn't set you up in the role of the hero, starting from nothing and working your way up to fight God or overthrow kingdoms. Could that potentially happen? Maybe. I haven't gotten far enough in the game, but really, this is just a game about your story. You have a number of different options that you can choose when starting a game, but they all basically boil down to you've got a group of random people who are just trying to survive in the dung ages with a little bit of fantasy elements here and there, right? Whether that be a group of young buck aspiring adventurers or deserters of a local army, a band of criminals, you get the idea. You're going to build a mercenary company and take on whatever jobs you need to and do whatever dirty things are required of you to keep your people alive and try to thrive in this world. Regardless of what you do choose to do, though, the world goes on around you. As far as I have seen, you're not going to be changing anything in this land beyond the specific localized outcomes of individual events that you wind up stumbling across. There are a couple of exception cases wherein you can choose which particular leader you're going to back, and that will most likely have an influence on the region going forward, but once you complete one zone, you move on to a new zone, and there's no guarantee that you're going to hear about the previous place as you get too caught up in whatever the goings-on of the new location are. Since the story is so freeform and free-flowing, the game is much more heavily centered around what you choose to do, how you choose to level your party, what actions you take that influence them and the world around you, and what further consequences that can have for you down the line. And the game encourages this through a large variety of trackable stats that go up over time with various different achievements or exploration discoveries. You have trees for knowledge gathering, overall glory in combat, thievery, and the list goes on. And as you develop each of these, they will expand into more and more esoteric options. Sometimes this will mean giving you new abilities or new crafting recipes. Sometimes this means that you'll get full-on skills like the ability to sprint on the world map, which is massively valuable when you're trying to get away from marauding brigands or the law if you decided to piss off one too many people. If you do wind up getting into an encounter, though, this is where your turn-based tactics and strategy comes into play, with relatively small battle maps, meaning that you have very tight, frenetic combat where you're desperately just trying to keep your party alive because death is permanent here. As far as I've seen, there's no magic resurrection or anything of the like. Even though I've only spent about 10 hours with the game thus far, spread over the beginnings of 3 different campaigns, there's already a ton of different strategic options available to you. You've got your classic rogues, warriors, rangers, and archers, and then more esoteric things like thaumaturges who use poison mists and smokes to apply medicinal effects in combat, whether helpful or harmful. You can even level up your pony so that it can join you in combat, and while it doesn't listen to what you say and very often gets in the way, it is a meat shield that can do some extra damage. You have full suites of gear of different armor types and weapon types that give you a variety of different types of attacks, special abilities, and the like, and there's a major focus on prioritizing what the turn order is going to be so you can take out targets that are going to be going sooner in the order by intelligently choosing who's going to move when and positioning them to be able to maximize their team effectiveness. Once you've finished fights, collected some bounties or some gear, you can make your way back to town or interact with some traveling merchants along the road, and if you decide not to, jump them and try to take their stuff, which is probably a bad idea, especially early on in the game. You can exchange your goods for other types of food, weapons, accessories, etc., or even consider leveling up different professions for each of your party members, as well as hiring new party members. Once you get all squared away, you head back out on the road and go do more missions, find more encounters, and figure out how to deal with whatever new events the game decides to throw at you, as well as the occasional ghost animal, which is where some of the more fantasy elements start coming into play. It's a phenomenal gameplay loop, one that has sucked me in immensely and has made for an extremely unique gameplay experience. So with the general overview out of the way, let's start talking about the art and OST before we get into a greater discussion of the world and the mechanics. Visually, again, the game is very dark fantasy, quote-unquote, dung ages. You're not going to be seeing any anime characters here. Even the flashiest of armor that I found feels very practical compared to what you would expect to see in a lot of tactics games, and you're not going to be doing any sort of insane kick flips off the handle to triple strike multiple enemy groups. Like, you have a claymore. You can swing it in an arc, and if you're lucky, you'll be able to hit 2 or 3 guys with it. You have a bow, which means you're going to be able to shoot a dude from 15 meters away, and that's considered impressive. If you're real fancy and you're a rogue with 2 daggers, one in your offhand, you might be able to stab one guy and put some poison on him while throwing a dagger at another guy. Things are very basic and very tight here, which means that you have to use all of your options very efficiently to get the job done without losing your own guys. As far as I've seen, there is nothing in the way of magic to use with your party, and no fantastical out there classes and jobs. Y'all are just a bunch of schmucks, and you look like it, even as you do start to get cooler armor and gear. The world matches that aesthetic as well. You very much feel like you're moving across almost a world map or a painted countryside in Eastern Europe. Your big towns are a conglomeration of like 60 people spread across 6 or 7 buildings. Things are small scale here, and that means that when you get like a group of 5 lawmen on your tail, it's kind of a huge deal. That said, there's no lack in compelling visuals in terms of the overall gameplay. The world map is beautiful. All the art for all the characters is very, very well done, even if it is very grounded and realistic. And combat itself does look really nice. You get stylish finishers, even the basic animations for swinging your weapons are nice and crisp, and the battle maps are very easy to distinguish in terms of what's going on at any given time. Here's some mud, here's a javelin you can run over to grab and throw at somebody. If there's a poison cloud on the ground, you can tell. It's very visually distinct while having a realistic style all of its own, and I really appreciate it compared to some other games we've played that are so cluttered and busy that it's hard to tell what's going on. However, I have to point out one of my absolute favorite aspects of the visuals of Wartales, which is when you get into combat with a particular enemy, which is like a whole, once you're in combat with someone, you can't leave combat without taking a hit type of thing. You have to know when to commit to a particular battle within the larger fight that's going on. Characters will actually stand there and be swinging at each other, jumping out of the way, parrying, blocking. No one's getting a hit in because you only get your hits when you actually use your abilities that deal damage, but no one's ever standing there static. They're always engaged in combat with one another, and it makes these little skirmishes feel much more like proper battles, which is awesome and something I would love to see more of from other games in the future. As far as the overall audio landscape is concerned, there's a lot to love here as well. What little dialogue there is fully voice acted with generally pretty solid accents and general performance.
Please, untie me. Lahart's goons could be here any minute. They want to take me back to Edoran.
Even in this place, lost in the forest, the people of Tiltron still find a way to inconvenience us. No way to chop wood in peace in this I-forsaken county.
I asked you for a blacksmith and you bring me a refugee on the run from an Edoranian count. Oh, very well then. But he'll have to work out back, and don't you go telling anyone he's here.
The music is absolutely banging. I love some of the music in this game. Still very grounded, very much like flutes and wind instruments and drums, the things you would expect to see in a medieval peasant town, but very fitting for the setting and still pretty high energy, especially in some of the fights. And the sound effects of combat in particular feel very crunchy and real, and I love it. As far as story is concerned, as we mentioned at the top of the video, there's not a direct narrative to really follow for your characters. You're more experiencing the stories and the events of the world as you proceed through it in your efforts to survive. For example, in the first zone, you'll wind up helping to, in some ways, resolve the conflict between the local populace and refugees coming into the area, causing problems, increase in banditry, you get the idea. And while you will get to choose who and where you're going to help and which side is going to benefit in particular small settings, you're not the ultimate players here. And once this conflict is resolved in one way or another, you're going to move on to a different zone that has its own events and its own set of problems that you're going to be more of an observer for rather than a player in. This is cool because it lets you have your own story that you tell while still learning about the world around you, and the world as it exists does sound very interesting. You get a lot of context clues about particular named characters, dukes and rebels and guard captains who are obviously important, but you may not have interacted with or seen yet and may never actually meet. But you can start to get the sense for exactly what it is that they're doing and how it's affecting events around you and the other characters that you're interacting with. This allows for a breadth of storytelling that's very hard to do when you have a more central focused protagonist character. And while I get some people might not get super into it because they want to have that focal point character that they can kind of get into the role of, I really do just enjoy being able to see the world unfold around you as you go around doing whatever it is that you're going to do. If you get deeper narrative implications about why the world is in the state that it is and what greater forces are at play, I don't know yet. I only have about 10 hours in the game thus far, spread over 3 different campaigns, but I have to say I'm extremely curious to learn if there is, and even if there isn't, I'm just going to enjoy finding out what there is to know about the world. Finally, though, we do need to talk about mechanics, and right off the cuff, you've probably already been able to see from some of the gameplay I've had on screen and my descriptions of what you're doing, but Wartales has a very strong blend of sort of survival RPG and turn-based tactics game. Now, I know some people are going to get turned off by the idea of like a survival RPG. I don't want to punch trees. Not what I'm talking about. This is more of an sort of MMO survival. You need to be able to have money to pay your mercenary band. You need to be able to have food to keep them fed, and you're going to need to have the supplies to either fix your armor or craft new armor or be able to trade with people to get other supplies that you need. Sometimes this will mean taking on a profession as a woodcutter with one of your characters and going and chopping a bunch of wood to use for either your own crafting or selling to a family in need. Sometimes it's going to mean that one of your characters becomes a cook so you can make more efficient use of the rations that you acquire from merchants or from game hunting to keep everybody fed and going. That's the type of survival that we're talking about here, making sure that you're striking a balance between the resources that you need to live versus what you need for loot and weaponry and the like. This means that very often mission rewards are not going to be anything that you can use functionally for combat, but more will be items that allow you to get to the next combat without just keeling over or having everyone desert you. And it's a cool way to have a little bit more going on in the world map and a greater variety of earnable things to keep the loot pool fresh and keep you more engaged with what's going on around you. Of course, as we mentioned, the tactical combat is one of the major focuses of the game as well, with a major emphasis on being able to chunk through enemy armor, keep your own armor alive, and then being able to gang up on particular enemies, divide and conquer, and bring them down so that they don't deal too much damage. You'll do this in part by manipulating the Valor system, points that you'll either be able to earn out in the world or temporary points that you'll be able to earn from certain actions in combat to activate your special abilities that can give you a big push in the right direction in terms of overpowering your enemy. This can be everything from a battle shout that gives every allied character within range of it one reaction attack the first time they next get hit in combat, which is extremely powerful, to a combo attack that actually lets you get 3 quick hits in with a dagger as long as you're hitting them from behind and they're already engaged with another ally. There's a big emphasis here on team play, and that's good because you're able to grow your roster quite large. So having different ways to incentivize you picking either characters that have developed relationships with one another or just having good positioning so you can always be trying to get a flank or a surround or a pincer on an enemy, especially one that's particularly strong, is very nice to see since you actually have the bodies on the field to make use of a system like that, which is not always the case in a tactics game. Due to the down-to-earth and very gritty nature of the game, healing is not easy. You have basic bandages that you can apply to characters so long as you have Valor that can heal a little bit of HP, get them off death's door if they are about to keel over, and remove some basic status effects, but they're very limited in their use because you have to be right next to someone and actually have the points to be able to utilize it. You will be able to get some other healing as you go, but it's still very limited, and there's a much greater focus on having proper formations and clearing the enemy quickly, rather than tank and spanking with a healer in your pocket. As you clear combats and quests, you will get a lot of interesting new loot very quickly, as a matter of fact, and while you do need to be able to very particularly match different weapon and item proficiencies to particular characters, the items that you get do scale into pretty interesting builds quite quickly. For example, I found a really nasty dagger early on that allowed me to do an AoE spin attack on multiple enemies around me while also poisoning them, which was an absolute game changer. But to get that weapon, I had to kill the bandit boss that was wielding it, and I tell you, he tore me up the first time I saw him use it. It was bad. But from that point on, I've been able to use it myself and start crafting a poison-based build for my rogue that has been extremely effective, especially since I gave him some throwing knives to give him some melee and ranged options. As your characters level up, you'll be able to put points into different stats, as you would expect, but what's interesting is they're kind of randomly rolled. 3 stats for a character will be chosen on level up, 2 of which will have 1 point that they'll be able to increase, and 1 of which will have 2. But what stats you get and what the stat is that can get more per level is randomized. So making the most of your levels where you can to get the stats that you need for your characters is a consideration that you're going to have to make. Periodically, you will also be able to get new abilities or promote into new classes entirely, meaning the 2 characters that start as sword and board wielding tanks will be able to diverge pretty heavily with all sorts of different options for direct combat and team support as you progress through a campaign. Once you get out onto the world map, you'll find that it's almost kind of like Unicorn Overlord in a way, for those of you who are familiar with that phenomenal title, where you'll be able to traverse different types of terrain, run into towns, farms, roving bands, not all of which are hostile, unlike Unicorn Overlord in most cases, pick up resource nodes and run into all sorts of random quests as you go. But each region is locked to a particular zone, and you need to complete certain quote-unquote story objectives to get permission to leave to the next area. This leads to an immense amount of satisfaction just from exploring the world around you, as it never takes long to find a new point of interest or useful resources or some sort of job for a particular profession to do, so you just keep jumping around from thing to thing as you slowly fill out the map. This is part of why I've gotten so very quickly addicted to Wartales, because I get that feeling constantly of, okay, but like, I just want to see what's a little bit further into the fog of war. I just want to know what this potential point of interest is. Or I heard a rumor in a tavern about something going on with like a weird lighthouse that's possessed or something. So I gotta go check that out, and then I run into a bunch of stuff along the way. Again, much like with Unicorn Overlord, it's not a feature that you see in many games of this type, and I would love to see more of. All told, I absolutely adore Wartales. And depending on whether I'm able to get this video out, I either am so excited to share it with you all on stream, or I'm sure that I had a great time streaming it for you, depending on when this video gets published. If you have not checked out Wartales for yourself, I do extremely heavily recommend that you go do so. So long as this sort of more realistic, dung age fantasy, dark fantasy aesthetic is your vibe, I think you will very quickly get sucked into it. Just make sure that you unlock the ability to run from your overall party skill tree as soon as possible. It will make it so much faster to traverse the world map. As far as all of you are concerned though, if you have played Wartales before, or you're interested in checking it out after seeing this video, maybe you've been on the fence about it, but this flipped you on it, do please let me know. Let me know what your thoughts are of the game if you have played a bunch of it, and tell me how spot on I am with some of my analysis of it thus far. Are there wild changes in terms of how much you impact the story later on? Do you get a lot more magic and mystical stuff, or does it still stay very grounded? I would love to know all of it, because I'm absolutely going to be playing a lot more of this, and if it's something that you'd like to see more of on the channel, do please let me know that as well, so I can potentially work it into the schedule. Thank you to the fine folks at Turn-Based Thursday Fest for finally giving me the opportunity to check out this phenomenal title. It just goes to show just how many gems are out there that you might never have a reason to check out, but which could very quickly become one of your favorite games if you give it the chance to do so. With all that said though, I think I'm going to wrap this one up here. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope that you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there, everybody. And remember, be good to each other, y'all. Bye now.